you for your introduction. So now I'm going to introduce Professor Andy Gao. So before I get started, just quickly remind everyone, this talk will be recorded. So for all of the online audience, please switch off your camera if you don't wish to be seen. Thank you. So as Professor said, we are very honored to have our speakers, Professor Andy Gao, joining us today. He's a very fantastic speaker. So Professor Andy Gao is a language teacher educator at the School of Education, University of New South Wales. His research interesting, including language learning agency, language education policy, and language teacher education. He edits the International Journal of Applied Linguistics. He's also an executive editor for teaching and teacher education. Yeah, Professor Andy Gao, if you're ready, can you please share your slides?
Sure. Can you enable me to share screen?
Yes, for sure.
Not yet. Before I start talking, I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Bedigo and Gedigo People's Land, that I would like to acknowledge the traditional custody of land, or pay my respect to past, present. This is a kind of a tradition in Australian universities. Before we talk, we always would like to acknowledge who owns land. We actually are guest people to the land, are the First Nation people. So now, well, first, thank you, Charlene, for the invitation for me to talk about language teacher agency again. And also thanks Jing Yao and her colleague for organizing the talk. I know this is being creating probably a lot of work to Jing Yao and her colleagues. So this talk is actually based on a publication I co-author with Professor Jing Tao, my former PhD student, now working at Shanghai University of Finance Economics. We had a publication in a series, a language teaching element series of Cambridge University on the exact same topic, language teacher agency. Now, I have to tell you that I started working on the notion of agency when I was a PhD student, about 17, I know it's probably 21 years ago. But my PhD studies focused on language learner agency. I used the notion agency trying to explain why particular learners adopted particular learning strategies in learning. Then after finished my PhD, I thought maybe I can sort of survive on my PhD topic for 5 years. And I have to look for new areas and new topics. And I didn't realize that then I have PhD students and Tao Jian, and she said maybe we can use the idea agency to language teachers. And indeed, this is growing body of studies on language teacher agency at that time when she was doing her PhD. Then we work on language teacher agency, and looks like it's very exciting topic again, and in relation to language teaching, language teacher education. So we have been working on this topic and applying the idea agency to language learners and language teachers. And also sometimes we consider language learners and language teachers' relations to language policy and language education policy. So the idea seems to be quite useful for us to understand some of the phenomenon that we have been interested in exploring. This publication gives readers an idea of how the notion agency or teacher agency and language teacher agency can be conceptualized, and how can the idea work, why it matters, and how it works. I think it's getting increasingly important because in recent years when we talk about the rise of generative AI, I have the kind of feeling that many of us will have to worry about whether we will have jobs to do in the future and how we can respond to this emerging new, brave new world. I feel like the one particular solution to this the challenge we have to deal with is we need to talk about the inner resources within language teachers. That's one important inner resource within language teachers is what we call language teacher agency. So just sort of a big extended long intro to the topic language teacher agency. So this is going to be an overview of my talk. I will be talking about what it is language teacher agency, why does it matter, how does it work, and how can we promote teacher agency? If I have time, I will be trying to promote the idea that we need to adopt a kind of a trans perspective or multiple perspective on language teacher agency, because this is a very complicated concept, and this can be defined multiple ways. And usually when I deal with a complex concept and something that can be defined multiple ways, I find it difficult to take position a strong position in relation with particular view. And so I use these traditional strategies. I need to mix them up. So that's why we argue for the need for a trans perspective rather than take a strong view in relation, a strong view or in particular, or taking particular position in relation to this important topic. The reason I mentioned earlier that we need to think about agency is the world ahead of us is quite uncertain, full of uncertainty, and I think many of you, if you're doing PhD, um, when I start PhD studies, I found it really stressful. But I think these days, when I look at my PhD students, and I sense, I feel, and even they don't talk about it, I feel that they're very stressed because whether I mean they can do a good PhD thesis, or whether they can publish from the PhD thesis, and once they publish something, whether they can find a good job, and when they find a job, whether they can stay on because most universities and even in Chinese university, they're talking about you need to do something, achieve something, and then you get a tenure job. If you don't deliver what they expect you to do, then you will lose your job. So full of uncertainty for many of us. Certainly, the world is also complex, and uncertainty is to do with the complexity um, that we have to respond to, the complex world we find ourselves in, whether we talk about socioeconomical complexity or political constability, a lot of things are going on, and it's beyond that. These things going on created a lot of challenges, and these challenges often are beyond our control. And for instance, the kind of challenges we need to cope with, and that could be could be to do with dramatic social cultural changes. Um, that could be related to shifting educational policies and curriculum every time you have a new government, new education minister. They will come up with new education policy and curricula, and then once they have a new education priorities or policy curricula, and what you think you have been good at it and no longer be considered positive, and you have to somehow adapt and change. So every time change comes, you feel stressed, overburdened. For some reason, I don't know why this happened, but we also need to talk about the rise of generative AI. Although teaching teachers or educators our jobs seem to be secure. In one of the recent report published by one of the major business consultancy, teaching is one of the top 10 jobs that are less likely to disappear. And part of it we have because I mean, obviously teaching is relational. It's a very human aspect of it's very humanistic, well, human to do with human beings, and we sort of value this kind of a human aspect of learning and teaching. with this rise of generative AI. Although generative AI may take away many jobs in the future, but it still creates a lot of challenges because if you heard about recent outcries about what the University of Cardiff decision, they're going to cancel some of the departments. I think linguist departments probably will be one of them. This happened in Australia where University of Wollongong decided to cancel all the language programs and linguistic programs. And so if you do your studies in applied linguistics, you're sort of fearful of your career future, and partly the reason to do with this um, disappearance of language programs or linguistic programs is to do with the university leadership's perception. And they think you have generative AI, and generative AI can help us to solve a lot of the language-related problems. And as a result, there's no need for people to learn languages. And for this reason, I think we also need to think of ways to articulate the value of language learning and language teaching. Um, this is a challenge we have to respond to as language education professionals. There's also risks associated with professional practice as well. Uh, I think that the Australian government decided to have a where you have a sort of a place where you can universities doing a larger complaints for the first time, and they this office started running this year, and in the first few months they already received like over thousands of complaints from students or um, different stakeholders regarding what we are doing at the university. So it's really sometimes you think about teaching university, it's can be quite or teaching any place, it could be quite risky. And of course, once you have changes in education policy and curricula, and all these changes with administration to do with teaching and learning, and then we all have to adapt to these challenges and also respond to the challenges. And learning to adapt and respond becomes a very challenging task for many of us as well. That's why we need to think about the resource within, because the world has been changing and it won't stop changing because we don't like it. Um, it will keep moving on. It will come up with new challenges every day. So what really matters seems to be what is inside human beings. And then when we talk about language education, language teaching, and what really matters in relation to our response to the changing circumstances or contexts is something within language teachers. And that's why people start arguing the importance of agency and the role agency in language teachers' profession development. And we need to, that's why there's need for us to better understand why teacher agency matters, how it works, because then we can somehow build um, um, agentive teachers who can deal with all these uncertainties, risks in their professional practice and survive and thrive in their professional practice. Uh, argue that it's very important for us to recognize language teachers as reflective and reflexive agents, that they can look into their inner selves and identify the resources they have, or find opportunities within the external environment, and so they can exercise and grow their inner resources, and so that they can accumulate sufficient or enough inner resources that will help them to be better prepared for uh, challenging situations or changing situations um, that they find themselves in. You can think about to what extent do these findings resonate with your experience today. Um, but let me also start talking about some of the key concepts and agency. For those who are familiar with my work, I also did a lot work to do with learner autonomy, and so I constantly um, people constantly ask me that what's the difference between agency and autonomy. Sometimes I find it really difficult to answer this kind of question because I'm not very strong, conceptually strong kind of person. Um, but if I may, I try to argue that agency is different in a sense that autonomy seems to be more to do with individuals as a kind of individual capacity to exercise control over their lives. Very similar in a sense. Agency, we also want people, agentic learners, to take control of their lives, but autonomy seem to be more about individuals. Though I think people in learner autonomy, we argue learner independence is also crucial. But I think the origin of the word seems to be more to do with individuals. So we are talking about individual language learners taking initiatives, managing and controlling their learning. Um, Agency sometimes is seen as a natural property of individual, but one of the most popular conceptualization teachers will argue that it can be regarded as a social cultural mediate capacity to act. That's the probably most frequently cited um, definition of agency. I wonder whether this quote has been always miscited because I think Aachen is talking about something quite different. But a social cultural mediate capacity act has been frequently used to define what agency is in language education research. And if I may, trying to argue the difference between agency and autonomy, then I will argue that agency probably is the root, while autonomy seems to be an expression or a form of agency, a phenomenon associated with agency. I think Phil Benson used to say, if you think about agency, autonomy, and identity, agency is the starting point, autonomy will be in the middle, while individual identity will be the outcome. So he has this kind of triangle conceptualized to capture the relationship between agency, autonomy, and identity. I would I would side with him because I think this gives us a clear idea how we can differentiate these conceptually interrelated concepts. Um, I also would argue that highlight when agency that occurs through interactive positioning and social interactions. And that's for this reason, when we talk about agency, it's both relational and shared. So it's really difficult to talk about agency as kind of a attributes or characteristics of individuals. And when you talk about agency, it's we almost invoke the kind of the notion of this individual interacting with other individuals in a given context. Of course, agency will have important role to play when this individual is trying to negotiate their identity or pursue their identity aspiration. Now, identity again, although we tend to say individual identities, but identities is always something that emerge from uh, our interaction with the community or the society or the context we find ourselves in. And again, I am sort of trying to um, provide a cautionary note, a few cautionary notes here. Um, uh, there's not a universally agreed upon definition of agency. I think a lot of the concepts we deal with have this problem, and we don't. Maybe it's not a problem. It's a good thing that we don't have a universally agreed upon definition. That we can use different perspectives to explore this important construct or concept in relation to language education. Now, offering a definition agency, that's important because if you decided to offer a definition agency, then you actually make it transparent that you have some sort of assumptions. If you offer a definition agency, if you define agency in terms of social cultural immediate capacity, then you probably tell the world that you're taking a social cultural perspective to conceptualize the agency. And then it comes with certain kind of a theoretical assumptions and disposition as well. Um, we would argue a trans perspective. That means we trying to sort of mix up draw on different perspectives, because I think this different each perspective enable us to see something. It's like you have a blind man touching or feeding the elephant. Yes, I mean one blind man finds something, but four blind men can help us to see a whole much more holistic um, understanding of a picture or visualization of the elephant, and the elephant in the room is agency. And when we talk about agency, we also need to think about how this important notion is related to other key concepts like identity, knowledge, emotion. I think these concepts all feed into our discussion of agency. And I have to say, you might see me doing a lot of work to do agency, but I don't explore agency per se. I use agency as a lens to explore important issues such as language teachers' professional development. So if I don't try to come up with the idea, say, well, through my study, I found agencies like this. I've been using the usual approach to me, for me, is to say, well, agency enables us to see that um, how we can understand language teachers experience professional development. So there's a difference because people always think that I theorize on or agency or use empirical data to theorize agency. No, we've been using the agency as a lens to explore, understand the things that we really want to find out and understand. Okay, now I should talk about major approaches to conceptualize a teaching agency or a language teacher agency. Now, this is course, and there are multiple approaches, and we just sing out four of them. And one of them one of them is the kind of approach we usually take. And there's one approach we feel unsure about it because sometimes the readings can be too difficult for us to unpack. First is social cognitive theory, which conceptualizes agency as an intentional act. Now, I'll elaborate a bit more later. And the second is the most popular one, the social cultural theory, which conceptualized agency as a social culturally mediate capacity. And the last one is, well, third one is called post-structuralist view, which sees agency as a discourse practice. It's a little bit the reading we read appears to be a bit complicated. So I have to say we are not entirely sure whether we understand the readings in relation to this view. But the last one is the one that we tend to adopt in our research, what we call ecological perspective. We with this perspective, conceptualize agency as a phenomenon of doing. So something we can associate with okay, thank you. Uh, we can I'm trying to finish so I'll leave some minutes for question and answer. Oh, the question is trying to think about the findings resonate to your own experience or not. It's just kind of a keep coming up, but this just briefly on how we and this the social cognitive approach which conceptualize agency as individuals' intentional act. Um, the belief system is the foundation of human agency, according to some of the key proponents of this view. Now, if you adopt this kind of a perspective, and then you'll be asking questions about, for instance, how does teacher self-efficacy influence his or her own exercise of agency? And there's key concepts related to this kind of inquiry, and that's to do with self-efficacy beliefs, knowledge. Usually you will adopt a quantitative approach to exploring um, approach if you adopt this kind of a notion, self-efficacy can be measured, and knowledge somehow, or if you measure knowledge in terms of belief statements, you can also measure it. So you do kind of a statistic analysis, but I've also seen quality studies using this kind of perspective as well. The second perspective is, as I said, the most popular approach to conceptualizing um, agency, that in terms of a social culturally mediated capacity act. And it's one of the important quote here is there's no way to reduce the analysis of socially distributed cognition to a set of individual process. As a result, a type of agency is attributed to the group rather than to the individual. So it's kind of the kind of relate to the one of the key um, theoretical underpinning of agency, that we believe that agency is relational and shared. So social cultural approach seems to um, argue that agency is to do with a group rather than individual. And hence, the idea, the kind of research question you can ask if you adopt this kind of perspective: how is teacher agency is mediated by contextual conditions? Usually, when we talk about agency, uh, um, you'll be exploring the impact or mediation of a new policy, new curriculum. Every time when in any context you have education reform, it's always a good moment for us to find out teacher experiences, and then agency could be a very useful concept for us to make sense of teachers' experience during the education reform. And key credit concepts, something like intermental functioning, that's to do with the brain working together. And when you adopt this kind of perspective, we also will be exploring the mediation tools or resources. The third perspective is the post-structuralist view, and as I said earlier, I'm not entirely sure whether I get this right, but this approach conceptualizes agency as a form of discourse practice. Basically, this if you take this position to argue that someone needs to take up a certain position. Once you take up this position, there's certain thing you can do. The kind of agency or it's to do with the kind of position you take up. Um, if you're not in that position, you can't you're not, in a sense, you're not supposed to um, have this kind of a knowledge, or you can do this sort of things, or you can only speak for the kind of for themselves, for the kind of accept response for their actions if you have to think up you are taking a particular position, or you're positioned in particular ways. So the agency seems to be very much to do with kind of structural position we occupy in a given society. So the kind of question you can ask if you want to adopt this kind of perspective: how does a teacher agency interact with the positioning in the social context? Sometimes in the context of education reforms, education policies, or school policy tend to position teachers in particular ways, and then teachers will somehow interact with the kind of positioning in the teaching practice. And the key related concepts to do with this kind of approach to uh, conceptualizing teacher agencies to do with positioning and knowledge, because knowledge seems to be seem to be closely associated with positioning as well. As I said, the idea that we would like to uh, often take up in my own research or our own research is that we is the ecological perspective uh, that conceptualize agency as a phenomenon doing. We define agency as a temporal situated achievement, so it's kind of in spatial and temporal context. Um, as a result, if we try to understand agency in different contexts, in different times, we need to focus on the past inferences, experiences, which quite understandable. It's kind of straightforward kind of thing for us, very natural, because if we want to understand teacher agency or their actions in particular contexts, in terms of spatial and temporal context, and you need to understand past inferences, experiences, and you need to understand their engagement with the present, and then you need to understand their orientation to the future. Teacher agency is always exercised for a certain purpose, which is about future, and within certain historically formed social cultural material circumstances. And it's also constrained resource by these circumstances. So this past and present inference. Um, if we're trying to uh, adopt this kind of a perspective in research, and we were trying to ask questions like how is agency achieved, and the key related concepts will be that to do with identity, or you will be talking about emotion, you will be talking on beliefs as well. It's looked like belief is a very popular concept because it appears in many perspectives that can be used to explore teacher agency and language teacher agency. So why does teacher agency matter? And well, it matters for us. We sum up a variety of roles that it could play, and it helps teachers to pursue professional development. It will sustain design education changes. So you introduce education reform, teachers need to undertake professional development. If they develop their professional capacity, and then they are able to sustain the design education changes. And then ultimately, we think that if education reforms are for the has to have all the good purpose, and sometimes education reform do not necessarily have all the good intentions. But let's say, well, education reforms truly deliver their good intentions, then eventually we'll see improved student learning as well. Um, we say that, well, teacher agencies exercises for multiple purposes, for pedagogical, moral, and for change. Now, this is the right things that you can think of when you talk about teacher agency. So you could it at the individual level, and teacher agency help us to continuously learning to teach or improve teaching. At the middle level, it could be a teacher agency will help teachers to better implement education policies. And at the big level, we think a teacher agency will enable us to pursue social justices as well. Um, um, and of course, at the graduate level, teacher agency will help us to continuously developing our capacity and in response to changes in any given context. Um, how about language teachers? Well, um, o- um, well, this is again to do with kind of a different um, what teachers in relation to different agency in different stages of learning. So we talk about student early teachers, and that to do with kind of a how we can pursue professional development um, in service teachers that often make feel that they dispute and threatens even because the education reforms always create kind of challenges and the rising regime accountability external standards and also creates a lot of stress for teachers. So we need English service teachers and student early career teachers need to respond to different kind of challenges in their professional life and professional practice. I would argue that it's very important for us to think about relation agency because teachers shouldn't work on, although teachers usually teach by themselves within the classroom, but they shouldn't work alone. And we need to emphasize the importance of how teachers can work together in response to the challenges. And policy implementation, that's I probably just briefly mentioned when I show the figure. Um, policies, people who introduce education reforms will see teachers as key change agents, that teachers will experience conflicts between their value system, the values promoted by education changes. In the context of these kind of conflicts, if somehow conflicts can be overcome and teachers can sort of adjust their value system to the values promoted education changes, of course, they will be more able to ensure that the policy will be delivered in teaching and reflected in terms of improved students' improved learning. that teachers, of course, they will contest the change if they don't believe in the values promote education changes. Sometimes we can do nothing about it because they can contest the change implicitly and passively. I think it's very important for education policymakers to ensure that teachers feel that they return control of their professional practice. If they don't think they return control of their professional practice, they may contest the change implicitly and passively. Social justice, we we're not saying that um, we we encourage teachers to become rebels or revolutionaries. But there's issues that teachers can deal with in teaching, that they can ensure that social justice is still can be achieved in teaching. Um, Something like they need to be aware of the social, cultural, economic conditions, those who are frequently marginalized and socially excluded, or they can find ways to promote social justice in teaching by adopting um, pedagogical activities that can uh, raise awareness among students about the issues to do with social justice, for instance, and they can engage controversial yet crucial issues such as gender and race in teaching as well. I understand that this is getting increasingly difficult in some contexts, and it's really difficult for teachers to deal with these controversial issues because there's risks involved as well. But importantly, I think we need to make sure that teachers realize that um, we need to be critical, reflexive, and demonstrate and show that we to students that we are reflexive about a lot of things that we experience as teachers. And reflexivity is certainly a central element of agency. The cultural level, and this is professional development, I won't skip it. Basically, I think it's very important for our teachers to feel that they're in control of their professional growth and professional development so that they can somehow develop themselves in relation to the changes they need to respond to. I also want to talk about the manifestation of teacher agency because this is too is kind of sometimes um, inevitably teachers' values will be in clash with the kind of values promoted by education reforms. We have two studies show that how can we overcome this kind of contradictions or clashes between teachers' values and the values from education reforms is a very important question. But um, this study talks about the teachers and schools understanding what it means to be a professional and impact of this mismatch on the exercise of teacher agency. And we usually, of course, teachers, you draw on our prior experiences to make sense of what it means to be a professional. And schools and school principals usually draw on macro level discourses. Um, this discourse is often related to accountability and standardization. Then you have the two types of agency and reflecting teaching. You can have teachers stepping up, taking a step up. You can also have teachers push back. Stepping up means that when teachers understanding the way they teach, what they want to teach, fits well with the policy discourse of the school, and they will go above and beyond the perceived expectations and roles. Now, this is very important for us to be aware of that once we feel that our values um, um, match or fits the values and that are promoted by policy discourses, we are very happy. We will be do whatever we can. We will go above and beyond perceived expectations. But if somehow the clash or the conflicts cannot be overcome, then you have a form of resistance. We reject our teachers reject or negotiate, reconfigure the perceived expectations roles imposed on them. And we teachers can always do that because after all, teachers will be teaching with the closed doors and whatever goes in the classroom, of course, professionally. It's really difficult for us to dictate what they can do exactly when they teach a group of students. another study, similar kind of results, and refer well, it's about teachers' language arts, exercise agency to engage with policy, moving from accommodation to appropriation. Not bad. I mean, it's not resistance, but it's still it's not the kind of a ideal scenario that policymakers would like to see. So teachers usually examine and identify areas of education policy that match their teaching beliefs, and then if they find that their areas of education policy match their beliefs, then they will take ownership and of the policy, and they will implement the policy faithfully, so that the policy can achieve its intended goals. But if somehow the policy is not necessarily matched their teaching beliefs, and then they will try to appropriate the policy by reframing, by adapting it in practice, and they will probably will consult a lot of trusted sources, their colleagues, and their seniors, or well, the professors or whatever the resources, the sources they trust. So in a sense, teachers are not only just a policy implementer, but they also policy authors. And this is important, and why we need to ensure that that policymakers should recognize that agency that teacher agencies and the role of teacher agency in adapting and in implementing particular language policies or particular language curriculum. This is about language teaching agencies. I think we need to talk about, because the previous slides talk about teacher agency in general, but this is more about language teacher agency, and we know that we have to respond to increasingly complex situations. We have to deal with working with students of diverse backgrounds. In some cases, that when we talk about non-native speakers or native speakers, we need teachers need to exercise agencies and in response to different professional situations. Native speakers may need to deal with potential marginality, and while non-native speakers may need to deal with native speakers' ideology. And also, like all the other our teachers in other subject areas, we all have to face with shifting curricula and pedagogy and expectations, and um, on us to adopt new pedagogics, and sometimes import from new other contexts or others developed by leading scholars in the home country. And this is career transitions, and this is to do with the kind of a study we read a few years ago for instance, in Vietnam, when the language education policy uh, sh sh shifted towards more emphasis on English. A lot of foreign language teachers in Vietnamese universities, some of them they used to teach Russian, they now were told they had to teach English. So, and how these teachers respond to this kind of challenge. Um, you, these teachers, if they want to survive in the universities, they need to exercise agency to manage their career transitions. So there's a lot of things that teachers need to do, language teachers need to do. Um, I just want to have a very quick a few slides on how we can promote teacher agency. We come up with the kind of we adopt ecological perspectives, and as a result, we look at different layer of context. We have look at it level individuals, level subgroups. We talk about the level of groups, and so basically, two important things we can do if we want to promote teacher agency. We need to change the contextual conditions that that can be reflected at the different groupings at the different levels, and we need to promote active growth. So, for instance, you can build teacher communities of various size, very strongly emphasize the importance of forming groups, because Uh, we believe 1 + 1 is larger than 2. For this reason, it's important because challenge is so huge. It's important for us to come together. It's important for us to create safe, socially supported spaces for teachers to exercise agency. I think it's important for us to have bottom-up group formation. Then you can have lots of activities as to support each other, like giving advice, seeking input, ask questions, sharing concerns and doubts. And there's a need for us to minimize the negative impact of a top-down approach. There will be top-down approach and top-down initiatives, which often have a significant impact on professional practice. And respond to top-down approaches, we need to form some kind of bottom-up uh, community groups to balance. We can't really get rid of entirely the impact of top-down approach, but we at least can neutralize or minimize or balance the impact. And by forming groups, gradually we can change and the structural condition for education policy making and implementation, at least implementation, not policy making. This is kind of wishful thinking to do with the kind of education policy making. But imagine that our groups grow, and to a certain size, maybe eventually we'll be able to influence educational policy making. As I said, it's probably a bit wishful thinking, but at least we can create a more favorable structural condition for policy implementation. There are a few rules or characteristics of these kind of groupings, and the work we do in this kind of groups will be relevant to teachers' work, and we need to be collaborative and work the benefit of all. And there's need for teachers to trust each other and remain open to each other, and this is difficult because that kind of groups um, are not natural given or social given. We have to somehow work um, on building that kind of group and developing the group and sustain that kind of groups. Promote the active growth, and it's very important. It's very important for us to overcome first deficit discourse related to language teachers and learners. For instance, negative positioning of certain teachers and non-native speakers in the profession. And then we're trying to somehow create kind of reflective space for critical engagement that we can somehow share, reflect on our presumptions. Then by critical reflect on our presumptions, then we can somehow find ways to adopt alternative discourses to represent ourselves and language learners. Well, I mean, traditionally, of course, writing paper for journals, undertaking professional interaction, this seems to be the kind of major ways for us to reflect on assumptions or find ways to adopt alternative discourses. But then you can also create kind of this social groups online that allow multimodal narratives, or trying to encourage that we can use image to reflect our prior experience assumptions, or trying to offer alternative discourses for the creation of a space where teachers can negotiate more favorable professional identities to enhance their sense of agency. This is kind of things we suggest we can do. Then, of course, again, I think I feel like reflecting on the kind of proposed actions, and they may be a bit detached from what actually teachers can do within the context. And I think the most important thing, first most important thing is that teachers need to come together, and then they need to share, and then they need to learn from each other that their problems are not their challenges not unique to themselves. Then they can probably find ways to find common solutions. The importance of collective agency, and as I said earlier, that teaching agency is highly relational, social. We strongly believe that 1+1 is bigger than 2. And collections, of course, will involve collective actions of group of teachers. That's the importance. That's why I keep talking about the importance of people coming together. Um, but when people come together, we are not saying that everything will be okay. There will be issues that we have to deal with when people come together. For instance, the complexity of language teachers' workplaces, office politics may undermine collective agency, and also if language teachers are not connected at the individual and levels, especially they're not connected to each other at the emotion, each other emotionally and intellectually, and then collective power of the team will be undermined as well. And then languages may not form this kind of connection if the team does not engage in collective activity. You cannot simply say, well, we form a group and you don't do things together. And if we do things together, then there's time cost as well. So uh, we fully understand the kind of challenges teachers will and we will experience when they come together to form these kind of groups. But we believe that the kind of the benefits of forming these kind of supportive groups will eventually be um, well, much bigger than the kind of costs. So there will be some sort of payoff in the end. This is all the end. That's well, the argument is that we can have different kind of models and conceptualizations, and but probably it's better for us to say um, there's no one model that can do everything. It's probably better for us to adopt different perspectives and draw on different perspectives so can see appreciate something to do with teachers in a holistic manner. That's why we argue the kind of a trans perspective. We can use different theories, the different perspectives, trying to enable us to see to use the lens of teacher agency to appreciate the kind of critical issues we want to explore, understand holistically. Um, I don't want to spend time to talk about this kind of a figure that captures the kind of so-called trans perspective, but if you're interested, you can ask. It's basically trying to sort of synergize the different perspective we have to make sense of teachers in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Gao, and your presentation is very mind-opening because this is not my area. I don't study teacher agency, but I still found this is very, very valuable. Thank you again, Professor Gao.
Thank
So
you,
now
Tina.
we do have 10 minutes for asking questions. So I'm sure Professor Gao will be very welcoming to all of your questions. So first the question is from our colleague Mayor. He's asking, are we using agency and identity interchangeably?
No, I didn't see, as I said, if you follow the Phil Benson's very simple kind of a presentation of conceptualization of agency, identity, autonomy. Agency will be the starting point, identity will be the ending point, with the autonomy in the middle. So these two concepts are certainly connected to each other, but they are, I think, separate concepts.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Gao. So next question is from Liu Jie. So Liu Jie's question is, may I just ask how to best translate agency, self-efficacy, autonomies into Chinese, please? Thank you.
Actually, agency is probably easier for us to translate into Chinese because um, if you take any social studies in Chinese secondary school, you will have to learn about agency and as a 主观能动性, 能动性. That could be,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's quite it's ideas. This has the origin with the Marxist ideas of agency structure. But of course, and uh, the recent theorization is not exactly the original idea of agency. It has to somehow enriched, drawing on different kind of perspectives. I think Christina want to ask that question as well.
Yeah.
Hi, Andy. Thank you very much for this informative talk. I think I have two questions.
Yes.
So I start with the first one. Where do you see the main link with emotion? I mean, between agency and emotion.
Well, it really depends on how you conceptualize emotion, right? Um, um, if I mean, I tend to feel that argue that emotion is something we can manage. Um, so if you talk about manage or taking control of emotion, then inevitably you need to talk about the kind of a agent person who can manage and can take control of emotions. It really depends on how you see the emotion, because I think sometimes we can talk about emotion as kind of strategy rather than just kind of outpouring of feelings. Um, um, yeah. If you,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, go ahead.
Uh, if you think emotional process is something that we can manage as human beings, then inevitably we need to talk about some sort of agentive individuals, human beings that who can sort of manage our emotions. But I know that sometimes it depends on the kind of the conceptualization emotion that emotions could be um, kind of quite different. And also, I understand the social cultural theory and Lentov and it talks about there's a notion called prosody of kind of how to say the word. That's the emotion and
Perezivание.
cognition to seem
Yeah.
together, because as we experience, we can't really separate the two.
Okay, yeah. Because I was thinking when we feel, we do something. When we manage our emotions, again, we do something. So there
Yeah,
is a very important link there.
yeah.
I agree, and I think emotion is also mediated by contextual factors in the same way that
Yeah.
agency does. Yeah. And my second question, sorry, I don't want to take up too much time, is this difference between reflective and reflexive, which I always find very, like the boundaries are not always very clear, right? They are a bit blurry. So how do these two terms differ?
Uh, I think one thing is to do is to kind of reflect on the outward, kind of outward. The other is seems to be going inward. That's how I define to differentiate the two. But I could be wrong, because you sometimes you inward looking and looking, trying what is going on in your brain, not brain, but your mind and soul. And then next time I think there was it's like search your soul, that kind of thing. Soul searching. But the other is to do is to kind of experience the external to you, and you're trying to reflect on your experience. That's how I differentiate the two, but I could be wrong.
I think this is a very helpful conceptualization. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you very much. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you, Christina. So next question is from Zihui. Zihui is asking, I was wondering whether you could share a little bit on your perspective on the relationship between agency and knowledge. Do you see teachers enact agency to orbit to knowledge, or do you see teachers' knowledge impacts their agentic choices? Thank you.
Uh, if you adopt the social cognitive perspective and the knowledge, that's will closely relate to teacher agency, which seems to be kind of a self-efficacy beliefs. And yeah, I mean, it's more to do with the more you know, and then you're more capable of doing. And I think for some teacher educators, this kind of theorization of knowledge to do with a practice. The more you know, the better you can be at teaching. Um, and then first, that as a result, you needed to obtain more knowledge, and professional development seems to be more about a knowledge, uh, having more knowledge. So yes, I mean, if you adopt this kind of a perspective, social cognitive perspective, and then I think the post-structuralists also talk about knowledge position, and if you position this way, or you take up this kind of position, then you can have this kind of knowledge, and then you can do particular things. We of course, when we act, and we act and not necessarily always impulsively, but also with some sort of, we make it an informed decision. When you talk about informed decision or informed action, then that's the kind of knowledge we have.
Okay, thank
I
you.
don't have a reference list because there's a Cambridge elements in language teaching called Language Teacher Agency. You can probably search it. Then you can find this publication. I guess you can access from the University of Art Library, but if you can't, you can just find me in the research gate, ask me to send you a copy of the book. A small book, it's only 60, 70 pages.
Okay, thank you, Professor Gao. So next question is asked by Victor. He asked me personally. I can read out
Okay.
the question. So his question is, what is the relationship between the teacher identity and agency for the new language teacher? Because some new language teachers are sometimes in identity tension. So how to understand this relationship?
Now, I know just people ask me the kind of question, identity agency. I'm not a very big theorist of identity agency. I have to say, I tend to use these concepts to make sense of something that really matters for me as a teacher educator. That is to do with teachers' professional development growth. So, when I try to understand how teachers grow, then I would look at what kind of identity aspirations they have. So what kind of teacher they want to be, right? We all have this kind of a aspiration that we want to be a certain kind of teachers. And you can call it this is teacher identity or our identity aspiration. But how we get there, and then we need to do a lot of things. And then when we are trying to understand what the kind of people pre-service teachers or early career teachers do to become the kind of teacher they want to be, and then to make sense of the actions that we need to use the notion of agency to understand the actions. So that's how I see that the kind of connection between agency and identity, that agency enables us to take a variety of actions in this particular case in pursuit of the kind of identity that we'd like to achieve, in order to become the teachers we like to become.
Thank you, Professor Gao. So next question is from Pan Pan. So Pan Pan is asking, could you elaborate more on Chuan's perspective of the last slide? It would be
Yeah.
highly appreciated if you could talk more about transformative agency. Thank you.
Well, transformer agency is like transport teaching. Essentially, it means that trans agency enables for us to understand the changes or transformations we would like to have. The kind of referring to the same kind of a thing I just mentioned about. We have some identity aspirations. We want to become the kind of teachers we want to become, and that we need to get that. We need to somehow adopt certain actions. These actions will eventually change us into the kind of person we want to be. Um, uh, so that in this kind of context, we talk about transformative agency, but transperspective could be we argue that there may be a need for us to adopt mixed methods approach, because one particular conceptualization, for instance, ecological perspective, maybe we can only use a qualitative approach, but then when you have a social cognitive approach, then you can have a quantitative approach. Now, there's always it's a tricky thing for us to merge different kind of perspectives into one study, because these perspectives may not be epistemologically or compatible. Compatible. So you need to be very careful. Argue why two perspectives need to be adopted in order to answer the research questions. But somehow there will be circumstances that we need to adopt multiple perspectives and use mixed methods to understand or explore the things that we value a lot in language teacher education. I think one of the recent publication we had with a group of people in Modern Language Journal talks about how we can conceptualize, reconceptualize second language acquisition teaching, and we propose a few things, and one is so-called language as practice, and the second is language education involves social justice, and the third thing that's we Yongyan Zheng at Fudan University and I propose, we need to bring back the kind of humanism we talk about agency, and then the last is to do how we can achieve this, and that we use mixed methods. So when we use mixed methods, often we will be using a mixture of theoretical perspectives. So in a sense, we are trying to affirm the importance of transperspective, because we need different perspective to enable us to appreciate different aspects of this important phenomenon.
Thank you, Professor Gao. So next question is from Lena. Lena's asking, is there any relationship between agency and motivation?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk, it's a kind of a, if you think about agency as something, well, I mean, something inside the human beings, motivation will be, well, arguably, that kind of outward um, a thing that like autonomy that to be highly motivated, so you also need to be agentive as well, because I would argue that agency is a kind of root of a lot of things that you can observe in relation to language learners or teachers, and so and agency would be the root and motivation would be the kind of outcome, or especially when we talk about highly motivation or highly motivated learners, or even we talk about demotivated learners, and that could be to be with a kind of a choice that they've already decided in learning and teaching.
Thank you, Professor Gao. So next question is from Xu Han. So Xu Han, would you like to ask the question in person? Or you want me to read out the
Quite big.
question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So a brief introduction. I'm Xu Han, and I'm also Professor Xiaolan's PhD student and Jinyao's colleague. So I'm currently doing the research on teacher agency as well. So basically, my question would be, so in the current landscape of Chinese higher education, and there's many universities are actively promoting EMI. However, there is a policy ambiguity about EMI, and often there's without explicit top-down directiveness to create a space where teachers must navigate and mediate institutional expectations and personal pedagogies as well. So, given these conditions, in the absence of formal policy guidelines, what are the theoretical and methodological frameworks can best capture teacher decision-making process and agency as well? Thank you.
You actually, I think agency would be a very good theoretical lens for you to make sense of teachers' actions in response to this kind of ambiguity. And I don't think the teachers will be able to have a clarity of the policy in relation to the promotion of EMI in Chinese universities. Strictly speaking, Putonghua or Chinese is the medium instruction in Chinese education settings. So the policy is like that. You have the national law governing the kind of language use, and so that's very clear. What happens is, of course, you have policy above, you have response at the bottom. So in order to promote internationalization of Chinese university, that's why these universities decide to adopt so-called the EMI. In fact, I think they will call it bilingual education program rather than English as a medium instruction, just simply to avoid that explicitly telling the world that they're using English as medium instruction, and they're not giving up Chinese as a medium instruction. That kind of ambiguity is created because it's necessary for policymakers to have this kind of ambiguity. If they are very clear about which language should be used as medium instruction, they might get into the kind of legal problems. So, but that kind of ambiguity, of course, creates uncertainties and challenges for whoever have to deliver the programs. And as a result, it's great for you to use the kind of theoretical lens of agency to understand these people's experience and responses and actions in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gao. If there has no more question, can I ask the last question before we
Yeah,
finish?
sure.
So, because Professor Gao, you have introduced it, like why teacher agency, especially language teacher agency matter. So I'm very curious about how do language teacher, particularly non-native English speaking teacher like us. So how do we navigate our agency in addressing like both the diverse social linguistic background of the student and also the native speakerism ideology in our profession? Thank you.
I tend to see agency as a kind of very important part of any resources we have. So for everybody, the world outside is tough, and so you really need to kind of accumulate enough inner resources so you can um, be prepared for the kind of challenge um, outside basically. It's when you're in education programs as a student, you're somehow protected. But then when you go out as a teachers or as a university lecturers, you'll be exposed to a lot of challenges and that you need to be really accumulate enough resources within yourself and strong beliefs in something, solid knowledge preparation, um, 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 capability to be adaptive, capability to be responsive. For instance, simply you have to to have the kind of a toolkits toolkits of resources that you need to have in preparation for the future. Yeah, for instance, simple things like it doesn't have to be grand. Simple things that you can read fast, you can write fast, you can think fast. That kind of skills and you need to accumulate it somehow through practice during your PhD studies. One of the questions to the knowledge set, definitely knowledge is also an important part of your preparation. But once that this kind of external things got into yourself, and it needs to transform into the kind of the self-worth. And you also need to somehow enable for you to have developed the kind of capacity to use these resources skillfully and strategically in response to different situations. I have to say, nobody will teach you how to behave when you graduate from PhD programs. You really have to learn that.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you, Professor. Ammon is asking if Ammon can contact you to ask you for some advice in the future.
Oh, can you? Yes, of course you can. But what will be the questions if you have anything that in your mind?
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Gao. Yeah, I think this is a very wonderful chance to engage such a meaningful conversation with Professor Gao. And Professor Xiaolan, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think, it's a really, really interesting topic, which we all, we all want to learn because we're all educators in one way or another. So it is very engaging and critical for us to understand our role as an educator. How do we play our role in education? It's inspiring. I think, today it's very late for Professor Andy in Sydney, so we will have to end our talk. Before we leave, we want to thank Andy for this wonderful and interesting talk. So we will have another opportunity inviting Andy back, hopefully in person one day. Also, I would like to remind everyone, so we are having another talk very similar, which is not called teacher agency, but we're talking about the practiced language policy in our next series. Will be in March 26, I believe. So watch out for our flyers and posters. Thank you again, Andy, for this wonderful and inspiring talk.
Thank you, Xiaolan. Thank you, Jing'e, and thank you, Shihan. And thank you, colleagues, who stay with me for the talk.
Thank you. And good night, Andy.
Good. Yeah, sure. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Professor Gao.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining us today. So as Professor Xiaolan said, we're gonna have our next meeting on 26th of March. If you have any interest in, if you want to join, just feel free to join. I'm gonna to share the link to invite all of you. And thank you again for joining us today. And we're gonna upload the recording on our YouTube channel, and I will also share the link with all of you. Again, thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Professor Xiaolan. Yeah.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Now, bye.
I can't really figure out how